Good afternoon, everyone, for joining us. I just want to briefly talk to us about the human in the tailings design process. Recently, there have been some high-profile disasters, and that brings into focus the whole issue of designing tailings storage facilities and what we can learn from the disasters and learn in general to improve the engineering of these structures. Now, what we will be talking about is not so much the advanced engineering specific knowledge itself, but the role of the human being in all of this process. The point we want to make is no matter how hard we try, it's the human who's the most critical component in all of this design process. And therefore, we need to get us engineers doing the right things if we are to learn from this and ensure that these things don't happen, and that in our own motherland, we will be designing and maintaining these facilities in such a way that we do not experience any disasters to begin with. So that's what we'll be talking about today. And several of these concepts that I'll be sharing come from a gentleman known as Henry Petrosky. He's written several books on engineering. Now, one of the things he says is engineering is a human enterprise. It's a human activity. As a result, it is subject to mistakes. We can make mistakes. But engineering also significantly improves our lives, and even the technology we are using right now to communicate. In this era where, due to COVID, we do a lot of things online, technology, engineering achievements allow us to do that. But every now and then we experience some failures, and those things can bring a lot of our activities into question. Sometimes these mistakes are only small, they are irritating, but nothing more than that. But there are times where they cause deaths, and TSFs have caused some very, some fatalities, some catastrophes. So we need to talk about that. The question is, can we learn from these experiences? And again, like I mentioned from the beginning, the focus will be on us as humans, as engineers participating in designing and constructing and maintaining these facilities. Is there anything we can bring to the table that will help us enormously reduce risks of failure? So not all of us may be familiar with tailings storage facilities. I just want to briefly describe what they are so that we're all on the same page. They are built, they are like dams, earth usually built with, from the earthy materials such as soil or rock fill. And we use them to construct these facilities. And we store the tailings slurry. Tailings are the residue after grinding rock and extracting minerals from them. So in Ghana, most of our mining is gold-based. When we get the ore, it is crushed, it is processed in a plant. The gold, actual gold, is extracted from this solution. And the remainder is all waste. And a large percentage of it is waste. It's sent to these facilities for storage. So these things go in as a slurry, as a wet mixture, and then they are stored. That's the general technology used around the world. And for these things to maintain their safety, to store all that waste safely, their design and their analysis and their construction and their management are all extremely important. But today we are focusing more on the design and analysis components. Now, there are different types of tailings storage facilities. There are three main types: upstream, downstream, and centerline. And all these are defined relative to the center line of the first initial dam. And we shall see that. So on this screen, we see the three types. The upstream type is at the top. Now, what it is this is the starter dam, number one. And then these are the raises. Now we can tell that the raises are built on top of the tailings, the waste material that we are storing. I described right from the beginning that this material is a slurry. It goes into the storage facility wet, liquid. So you can imagine trying to build on a liquid might not sound like a very good idea. But there are ways of ensuring that the coarse materials stay close to the dam face and are strong enough that we can build upon them. And that's the upstream method. We'll come back and answer why is this method, or was this method, the most popular? It has been very popular for many years. We'll see why. Then there's the downstream method. This is the starter dam, and you can see that all the races are heading towards the downstream side of the dam. So the side where we store the water and the slurry is the upstream side. The downstream side is the opposite side where nothing is stored. But we can see that with the downstream construction, we keep building and on the downstream side. Now, one of the main differences between these two is you can see you start here, but your dam is creeping and getting larger and larger, and you're encroaching upon land that has not been touched by mining yet. And that can be a problem. If you don't have enough land around your TSF, you've not purchased or permitted enough land, it makes it difficult, sorry, to use the downstream method. Now, you can also see that with the downstream method, the more you build as you raise your dam, the more material you need. So it becomes quite expensive as you go along. With the upstream method, you see that the material, the earthy material you're actually bringing in to construct the dam is much smaller. So that's one nice thing about the upstream dam compared to the downstream. But the downstream is generally more stable. And I showed you why, because here we are actually building on the waste, the tailings waste, which contains some water, which consolidates, it compresses as we construct. So the downstream is very much preferred because of the stability that it offers. But I've told you its downside. It's more costly, it takes up a lot more land, and it gets more expensive with time, not less expensive. Middle ground between the upstream and the downstream is the center line construction. So the center line of the dam does not change. Similar to downstream in some sense, we keep encroaching on more land as we build, but not as much as was the case with downstream. At the same time, it offers more stability than the upstream. So these are the three most popular means for building TSFs. The upstream method is very simple to construct, it's cheap, because the amount of earthy material that you have to move to build a dam, you see the races, is much smaller than you see for the downstream or the center line. So as a result, it's very popular. However, they are also known to be the most stability challenged. Most of the failures we have experienced with TSFs have come from those built with the upstream method. So you can imagine that it's becoming less popular in today's world, but it's still used, and there are many legacy structures that were built to the upstream method. So no matter what we do, we still have to deal with them. Now, TSFs have failed, and we'll look at a few examples. Now, what we'll say is that the frequency of TSF failures is about 100 times more than that of water dams. So it raises a question as to why these things are happening. And when they fail, they can severely impact the environment, and they can also kill people, cause fatalities. So let's look at a couple of examples, notable ones. There are several, and even in recent memory, there have been a few. We can't describe all of them, but just to give us a gist of why the human factor is so important in engineering these facilities. El Cobar in Chile in 1965, an earthquake hit a magnitude 7.4, something like that. And the TSF failed and flooded the town of El Cobar, and killed about 200 to 350 people. Just because censuses were not kept well, it was not known how many people actually lived in the town, but it's estimated that 200 to 350 people died. Engineers learned from it. So they learned to flatten TSFs, they learned to compact the tailings, or make sure that the raises, because it was an upstream dam, were built on more solid ground. So those things were done. And to do that, the technology of using cycloning to separate the tailings into fines and coarse, make sure the coarse materials are near the face of the dam, and the future raises are built on these courses, not on the fines, which are also known as slimes. as a result of this failure, the use of geomembranes was introduced more into TSFs. And then in Chile, they switched more to the downstream construction. So something beneficial came out of the disaster. These were some of the lessons learned. This is just a picture of that disaster from 1965. So we see it's monochrome, but it's sad that these are bodies they are carrying, and you can see the disaster all around the rescuers. In 1994, on our own beloved continent in South Africa, Marispoort, there was a tailings failure. What happened was excessive rainfall. There was not much freeboard in the TSF, so the water levels went so high. It overtopped the dam, eroded part of the dam, caused the tailings to liquefy and flow into the village. 17 people were killed, and infrastructure and lives were badly affected. And this is a picture of that disaster. So when everything went high, this area got filled, it was overtopped, it filled, got eroded, and tailings flowed out into the town or village and killed people. So that was another unpleasant incident with TSFs. Very recent ones, 2015, Brazil, Fundão Dam. It overtopped and it liquefied. This was caused by rainfall. So you can see that rainfall is not a best friend of these structures. Extensive environmental and damage and infrastructure damage. And 19 people died. But the main thing about this disaster was the amount of tailings that went into the environment and damaged the environment. This is a picture of the environment that has been impacted. And you can see there was a town, it's partially washed away, and several things have gone wrong. So that is what happened with this TSF. Okay, now let us go to the most recent, Feijão, again in Brazil, January 2019. Now this disaster killed about 270 people, extensive damage to the environment, to infrastructure. This is one of the most widely documented failures because it happened in very recent times. There are even videos you can see. Maybe after the talk, I can come back and show you a video. I have a link to it, but I might not do it now. But it has led to more studies on a phenomenon known as static liquefaction. We are changing the way we design these TSFs, the way they are drained, the way they are managed. Several things are coming in to ensure that this disaster does not repeat itself. So all those initiatives are great, and they are moving technology forward. But what we will see is that human factor. If we don't work on it, we will not have as much success as we should. In fact, we may not experience fewer failures, but probably even more failures. The human factor is that critical. So we'll be discussing that very soon. But this is Brumadinho. This is where the TSF used to be. It failed, and look at the devastation it wreaked on the environment. You can see how beautiful and green things were. Look at what happened. As a result of these tailings disasters, this picture is not necessarily Brumadinho, the next picture I'm going to show you, but it shows you some of the devastating effects of TSF failures. That's a river soaked with tailings. I mean, you can easily see fish and, wildlife, everything. Life in the river dies. And not talking about the chemicals that get into the environment, the impact is huge. And this goes for miles and miles. So it's important that we avoid these things. If we do our engineering well and we behave responsibly, failure can lead to success. But like we said, that will happen only if we learn. And we can do that by thoroughly investigating accidents when they happen. If we do that, we can learn from failure. If we do that, failures just become real world experiments. Not that anybody wanted that, not that anybody wanted the negative impacts, but once it has happened outside our, let's say, choices, let's make the best out of it, learn from it, and that's where the human factor comes in and is key. To be able to do that well, we have to think very carefully through investigations, try to find out the causes, the actual causes. We have to be sincere. We have to put aside our egos and our, whatever it is, and just learn what happened, what caused this failure, what can we learn. Engineers, like most scientists, tend to hold on to our theories, the approaches, the things we have been using that have worked well for us. Sometimes we keep doing that even though they are warning signs, and usually it's only when failure happens that we are convicted to begin to change things. That should not be the case, and this is why it is important for us, the humans, to continue to explore how to improve things. Just relying on machines, relying on technology will not solve the problem. What happens when there are these disasters is that we investigate them. Sometimes we think that we have discovered all the possible means of failure, so we can anticipate them, but that may not be true. So it's very important. That's why I said we have to be sincere. We have to be creative when investigating these things. Sometimes we arrive at, they are always, or not always, but sometimes it's, we are not sure what exactly caused the failure. If we focus on a likely but not the main reason that caused the failure, we can't be deceiving ourselves, which means we have the chance of repeating that failure. Sometimes, we just ignore some of the biases we have. And what we are saying is, as humans, we have to learn where these biases are and watch out for them and overcome them in our engineering. If we do that, then failures can contribute to actually advancing the state of the art, advancing science. And like we said, failures are accidental experiments, but they can contribute to our knowledge. So once failures happen, if some of us are young engineers, and in fact, engineers of any age, I always encourage us, let us learn from failure. So let's read a lot of forensic reports, books on past failures. It will actually enhance how we do engineering. Today, we rely on computers a lot. And I work for Rockscience. We are a company that sells software. So we are heavily into the use of computers. But that does not mean we don't recognize the dangers of removing the human being from that process. The dangers of thinking that computers can do all the work for us. Because of computers, because they work so much faster than our brains can work. They solve, you present a model to the computer, it will do way many more calculations than we could do, any one of us could do in our lifetime. It develops the temptation for us to try and solve everything with computers, forgetting that the models we build, all these things we do, involve us. The computer only does what we tell it to do. It's not by itself designing a tailings storage facility. It's doing what its human masters have told it to do. It just does it very fast and presents results in ways that we are not able to do before computers. And so what happened was, before computers, as humans, we knew our limitations and we wouldn't go in for super complicated designs. But now we do, because we can. And sometimes it leads to us coming up with designs that are so complicated. We as humans do not really understand them. We do not know what their outcomes will be. That's where the danger starts arising. And that's why we need to think through things carefully. My next slide is just something to give us some humor. But here is a young whippersnapper asking his teacher, or telling his teacher, how can I trust your information? Because the teacher is writing on the blackboard or the whiteboard, and he can't see how that can be good technology. It's outdated technology, so how could a teacher know much? But therein lies some of the problems we face today. The fact that we're not using computers in the past does not mean that past engineering was not good. It was actually very good. That's why we can learn a lot from our past and from paying particular attention to the underlying theorems, the underlying principles for designing the things that we work with. We use computers, but what happens is we can oversimplify the problem, and so the problem we specify in the computer is incomplete. And as a result, it can lead to unpleasant outcomes. The computer only does very rapid calculations and then presents lots of information to us. And sometimes we contour into very beautiful pictures. But if we as engineers do not understand what we are doing, we don't have a feel for how a TSF, for example, should behave like when it's designed. When the water table goes up, what do we expect? When we raise the dam, what do we expect? When we increase the slope angle or we decrease it, what are the effects? As engineers, we must understand all of these before we start using computers. Otherwise, we will not notice results that do not make sense. And just because of pretty pictures, we think we've done a great job, and then we lead ourselves into trouble. So for us, Rockscience, we spend a lot of time actually training people because we know the human factor is a critical component to all of this work that we do. Computers are being hyped as the future, and so we've been using them. But we forget that sometimes the fact that they can handle a lot of calculations and complex models does not mean that they are solving things right. So it's very important that we know what we are doing, even as we use software. It can calculate things much faster than we could do with a pencil and paper. But when we used to draw and do things like this, we were immersed in that whole problem-solving process. And we can do the same with computers. It's not like computers automatically take away our ability to do that. Actually, they can enhance that. But we as humans must recognize that and focus on it, even as we use technology to do our work. So even artificial intelligence, I don't think is going to solve all the problems. I don't foresee a time where we just throw problems at computers and we sleep and it comes up with answers and we just use them. As I just see that computers are just fast calculators. We are the people who do the thinking, and we have to use computers as a tool. When we are building or designing things with our tools, computers, and other tools that we have, it's very important. We have to ask questions while we are using these tools. What are the potential failure modes? What will happen when I raise the dam? What will happen when I increase the angle? What will happen if I apply a buttress? We have to be asking these questions, and these questions can be posed in computer models. But whether we actually ask the right questions depends on our own engineering judgment. So again, you see the human factor we cannot take out. The computer is only doing what the master, the human, is telling it to do. And unfortunately, sometimes we almost elevate the computer in the office to the role of an assistant engineer. And I'm saying that's very dangerous. The computer is not an assistant to the engineer. You are the engineer, the computer is only a tool to help us design these things. So we cannot learn from the previous failures, or whatever we learn will be quickly eroded if we're just throwing things into computers and not spending time thinking through them. Very important for us to do that. You only answer the questions that are posed. If you ask the correct questions, you get the correct answers. If you ask the wrong questions, you get the wrong answers. Very important. Now, because they give us a lot of precision, you can get so many decimal places. Sometimes people mistake that for accuracy. It doesn't mean the answer is accurate. It could be a wrong answer completed to many decimal places. It doesn't make it right. They are indispensable partners in our work. So ultimately that's what this talk is all about. As humans, learning from the disasters we've seen. There have been a lot of things like now there are sophisticated material models that we use to try and predict how TSFs will behave under different conditions. And that is great. But engineers using them must understand these things. They must put in the right information. If we do that, then our number crunching will be useful. And then we can even push designs, the boundaries of design, without exposing ourselves to risk. Very soon we'll see that innovation always incorporates risk. And that is why it's fundamental that as humans, we strengthen our knowledge of principles that we use in engineering, not lessen them and just rely on the computer. That would be a big mistake. Computers are here. We are not advocating for people not to use computers. Absolutely not. We can do a lot with computers. After all, we are using computers right now as we speak to communicate and communicate interesting ideas. But what we want to emphasize is they are only tools. What happens is sometimes software, in fact, in many cases, software is not developed by design engineers practicing engineers, construction engineers, people who are dealing with the actual structures in the field, the day-to-day behavior of these structures. It's built more by theoreticians, software developers who have a more mathematical background, programming background. So that disconnect can lead sometimes to our software tools not offering what the engineer needs. But that is why we do our best to work with the everyday engineer to make sure that the software has what the engineer needs. And we also call upon engineers when using software to ask critical questions. Don't just believe the computer because it calculated something for us. Computers can make us do a lot of work quickly, but that is no substitute for knowledge and experience. We must develop engineers. As engineers, we must be able to look at models and say, I don't believe these results. Challenge the models, get us to critically review it. And more often than not, you realize that somewhere in the model building process, somebody even that mistyped the number, did not add an important factor. All of these things can come out, but that's what the human can do. So we must use computers very wisely. They are a tool to help us. Now, let's look at categories of failure. A gentleman published a paper, and if you're interested, I can give you the full reference. His name was McCaig. But he looked at a vast number of engineering failures and looked at how to categorize them. One category was ignorance, where the designers were either incompetent or the construction engineers were incompetent or inspectors were incompetent. But ignorance, that human factor was there. Sometimes people who had responsibility did not have the necessary intelligence to go with the work they were doing. So this is one of the causes of disasters. Sometimes economy, we are trying to cut costs in maintenance or in construction, and that catches up to us. Sometimes it's mental lapses or carelessness, where we are not careful what we do. And this can happen even when we use computers. We can be careless and enter incomplete information or errors that can give us predictions that do not match what the real world is. So it's important. Sometimes we get unusual occurrences like earthquakes, hurricanes, typhoons, fires. These can also impact. But you will have seen that most of these errors had to do with the human. Lapses or carelessness, human. Ignorance, human. Economy, we make those choices, human. So the human factor is huge. And we have to recognize that. Now, what we understand, in the past, we understood this very well. When we use computers, sometimes, I'm not saying all of us, but in doing so, we almost forget what tradition is about. There have been traditional ways of doing things. We shouldn't be too quick to just discard them. Because of a long history with a particular way of doing things, we may realize that we have a lot of built-in knowledge. So when we use that design, it has got some safety or margins of safety built in. It is safe. When we try to push the envelope, it's very important that we understand what we are doing. Otherwise, we tread into territory where we can be surprised by failures. So very important. Let us use good design. Let us think through things. That is what the human is expected to do. And there are successes that show that it's not only experience that allows us to get our designs correct. Mankind landed on the moon without having ever been to the moon before. So that tells you that we can design things ahead of time, but carefully and critically going through all the aspects allow us to enjoy success. What we are saying is it's more inexperience, sometimes pressures of deadlines we saw, cost, those lapses that we saw. These are the things that often lead us into disasters. So as we are saying, innovation does not mean we'll fail. We should innovate. And there are many examples of successful designs. But we need to exercise cautious thinking. So that human factor is very important. We just wanted to disabuse people's minds of blindly using computers and expecting to be doing a good job or a great job. That's actually a terrible way to approach it. We should be using computers as tools that help us do the work, but we are doing the thinking. Anytime we innovate, we are taking on risks, is what we are saying. Sometimes we are successful. And when we are successful, the Petrosky puts that the engineers who are successful are called heroes. But when your designs fail, your innovation fails, then you are called a goat. Now, we are going to take risk, and life just means taking risk every day. You've taken a risk just to be online to participate in this session. Now, if an engineer prepares well and does everything that a reasonable engineer in his or her shoes will do, you have not been irresponsible. Even if something goes wrong and it is investigated, you are likely to be vindicated. But it's the engineer who does not prepare well to do their work. You do not acquire the necessary knowledge, or you make the same mistake that has led to failure before. You just repeat it. That's the engineer who has acted irresponsibly and can be held accountable. So I've had young engineers ask me, I mean, when we go through things like this, we get scared. So should I be doing engineering? Who should be doing the designs? I don't want to take on any risks. The good news is when you do what a reasonable person would do, you think, and even under those circumstances, if something goes wrong, you will be exonerated. You will not be held criminally liable because you did well. So when we are well prepared, we can even go beyond our experience. And these are the thoughts I wanted to share with us today. And thank you, and a lot of thanks goes to Dr. Petrosky or Professor Petrosky. He's written several books on this topic, and I encourage us to read them. This one, To Engineer is Human, is one of the first ones he wrote. Brilliant book. Thank you very much.